It's no secret when it comes to inshore saltwater fishing, tides are important, but what a lot of people don't understand is that these fish are going to change their positioning and where they're staged at depending on what the tide is doing. So if you're fishing a flat or if you're fishing a grass line or mangroves or even a dock, these fish are going to be different areas depending on what the water is doing. And that's what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about where these fish are going to be staged depending on what the tide is doing, and hopefully you can use this information to help you catch more fish in less time. Hey, it's Pat from Salt Strong, and on a recent trip that I was out with an insider and local guide, Brinkley Peters, we got on the discussion about how many people will get into an area. They might be in that right spot, but they're positioned off just a little bit, and that's the difference between catching fish and not catching anything at all. And we actually witnessed this on this trip. We were in an area that was holding the fish. We were seeing boats and people come up and fish, but they were fishing in the wrong areas because it wasn't the right place to be during these tide cycles. So let's talk about that. So for instance, on this day, we were actually fishing a flat and it was an incoming higher tide. And typically what happens with higher water, you want to fish the shallower areas, the areas that the water normally isn't going to be at whenever there's low tide. And a lot of times fish are going to use this as ambush points because the shallower the water it is, the less chance the bait fish has to escape. So oftentimes fish will feed in shallower water. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that the shallowest water is going to be up by the shoreline. In this case, the shallower water was actually out away from the shoreline. As you can tell in the video, we were actually fishing kind of far away, but this is where all the fish were. We happened to notice some boats that went all the way up against the mangrove lines. The problem is the mangrove line was actually deeper, and most of these fish were out on the shoal feeding on the bait that was out there. So if you're fishing a flat, think about what that water is doing. As that water is rising, these fish are going to be pushing up into areas where they normally wouldn't get at. And again, if they're going after bait fish, they like going after this bait fish whenever it's shallower. That way it has less places to escape. Now, as that water falls out and it starts going on an outgoing tide, oftentimes these same areas don't have enough water to support these fish. So what these fish are going to do is they're going to go just far enough away to wait for that tide cycle to come back in. A lot of times they're just going to go to the first drop off that they see, or they'll even find potholes within that flat and wait out the tide cycle there. You don't have to look very far away. Now, when it comes to fishing grass lines, these are typically better at higher tides because what happens is there's more water up there. The fish are going to move up there to feed, whether that be on the grass shrimp or bait fish or anything like that, and they'll use that grass line to ambush the bait that they're going there to feed up on, so they can pin it up against that grass line. Makes it an easier way for them to catch it. Now, as that water falls out and it moves away from that grass line, then the fish are going to do the same thing. They're going to move away from that grass line and they're not going to go very far. Fish are kind of lazy. They don't want to have to go very far to get what they need. So they're just going to go to the first drop off or an area that's got just enough water that they can wait out that tide cycle. And then as that water comes in, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to push up against that grass line. So on a high tide cycle, whenever there's the most amount of water, go against that grass line. And then as that water falls out, you'll need to pull off that grass line. Sometimes it doesn't take very much at all, maybe just a few yards, maybe 50 yards, but they're not going to go far. They're just going to go to the area that they need to sustain them until that water comes up again. Now, when it comes to mangroves, these are a little bit different. During a high tide cycle, what happens is you have the most amount of water, and these fish will push farther back up there, but the issue is they're out of reach. Most of the time, you won't be able to get your bait or your lures back up underneath there where these fish are going to be. And that's when fishing mangroves is actually better during a mid-tide cycle or a lower tide cycle, because one, it forces these fish out towards the edge of those mangroves, and two, because of the lower water levels, you'll have some more exposed areas that you can skip your lures back underneath those mangroves and get to those fish that are on their way out. So lower tide cycles are actually a little bit better when it comes to fishing mangroves because you're able to reach the fish. Now, when it comes to fishing docks, the fish actually do the same thing, but they don't have to travel very far. A lot of times these docks are built on a depth change, so these boats have access to that water. And what happens is on an incoming tide, on a higher tide, they're going to push actually further back on that dock, closer to the shoreline. Oftentimes they'll be feeding right along the seawall if there's one there. And then when that water falls out, they'll move out to those deeper pylons so they don't have to go very far. Docks are a great place to catch these fish, but a lot of people don't realize that these fish will move up and down those dock pylons depending on how high that water is. So make sure you're moving with that tide. On a higher tide level, fish closer to the shore. On a lower tide level, fish a little bit further away towards that deeper water, and that's how these fish are moving in and out. Now, this rule isn't set in stone. There's always variables with that, but if you follow these more often than not, you'll be able to get on more fish because you're going to be fishing where the fish actually are instead of going to the same spots over and over again during different tide cycles. And sometimes you'll catch them and then sometimes you won't. But the reason why is these fish move in and out with that tide. Now, if you are new to fishing or if you're struggling on finding fish in your area, we have a free online fishing school that takes you from a beginner level to an intermediate level and then to an advanced level. And this is actually 100% free. We don't need a credit card, just your email so we can send you the link. Now, the information that's in this course is the same information that has helped me go from a struggling angler to now somebody who teaches people how to fish for a living. So if you're interested in learning some more, again, this is absolutely free. It's the online fishing school. And for more information, go to saltstrong.com. So I hope this information helped you out. If you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and put them down below and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. As always, I really do appreciate you watching. Have a great one and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.